Welcome to All Things Work. I'm your host, Ann Sparacco. Today, we're exploring the world of cybersecurity in the workplace. Now, the first thought that might come to your head is that cybersecurity training, but today we're going to be jumping into with the practical steps organizations can take to respond to such threats and keep their employees informed. And to discuss this today and guide us through this in-depth topic is Abhishek Karnik, head of threat research at McAfee. Welcome, Abhishek, to All Things Work.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, you hold a significant role at McAfee, contributing to multiple security initiatives while leading diverse, globally distributed teams. So, could you tell us a little bit more about your role and the work that you do, including those unique challenges you face?
Yeah, as the head of threat research at McAfee, my team is focused on finding the latest and greatest threats and essentially responding to them as soon as effectively as possible. So we do a lot of reverse engineering, a lot of research, understand the threat vectors, the types of threats, not just malware in its physical form, but also things like scams. And one of the things that is important to understand about threats is that they're constantly evolving. The threat actors are constantly evolving their techniques. We are trying to adapt through education, and innovation and execution. So it's a constant cycle that we go through to ensure that our customers and everybody is essentially protected. Now, one of the biggest challenges we face is just the volume and the scale of attacks. So we are looking at a billion different parameters that come up to us every day. So the biggest challenge is finding that needle in the haystack, right? And so we're constantly looking at automation and looking at AI to help our team of researchers because we're a small team facing a very big, a broader adversary.
Wow, and that's just so much, like you said, a needle in a haystack. Not only is there's so much to this landscape, but it's an ever-evolving landscape as well. You gotta keep up with it all. So that's wonderful to hear, the services that you offer and that you're leading at McAfee. So can you start by defining exactly what a cybersecurity threat is, kind of what it might look like? You mentioned a couple examples, but let's walk through it a little bit.
Yeah, cybersecurity is a very broad term. When we talk about cybersecurity, people think about, that piece of malware, which is super complicated and you have this hacker. Yes, some of that is true, but essentially to define cybersecurity, it's a chain of events in our connected world where there is an adversary or some third party who is trying to get something out of you. So they're either trying to compromise your data, your processes, maybe your intellectual property if you're a business, and the goal of that, is essentially to get ahead, to have some leverage on you, to make some money, or probably have a strategic advantage. Now, we have seen some of, some of the more recent activity has also been around changing your perception, your thought, and your opinions, right? So that's where a big focus of pivot is going on, where AI is being leveraged to sort of influence how you think or what you think. So it's a little bit of all of that. So anything from as something as simple as phishing, something as simple as smishing, which comes text messages, to a supply chain attack where some malware author has injected his code into, your devices or into software that you consume. From something as simple to complicated to something more advanced like ransomware, where they actually encrypt your files and then ask you to pay up for ransom or even, critical infrastructure or adversaries acting on behalf of nation states. So it can be a broad array of things, and cybersecurity is very spread out in that sense.
Right, and I think, many of us, especially in our audience, can, relate to just the phishing alerts and the emails, anybody getting those text messages that are, maybe even seem quite threatening. It's very fear triggering. But when it comes to a company, there's a lot of vulnerability there, in addition to the individual person getting, these cybersecurity threats here. So what are the main vulnerabilities, organizations face when it comes to these types of threats that you mentioned?
It could be any vulnerability starting from social engineering attacks, right, to actual malware deployment, which is, somebody tricks you on downloading software claiming to be a game crack. It's not really a game crack. It turns out to be a malware which is ready to steal your passwords, or ransomware, which encrypts your system and then eventually wants you to make a payment. So, and then of course, on top of that is the more common ones, the ones that often we don't think about when we see our, films with cyber attacks. The simplest, the weakest link, the social engineering attack, which is people calling you, scamming you of money, you know, imposter scams, claiming to be from the tax or the IRS department, or having a deep fake online, which is essentially trying to change your perception or get you to vote for somebody that you probably didn't want to vote for. So it's all of that. And then the most common vectors tend to be simple things like typo squatting, where they might change the name of the URL. It almost looks like, the website that you want to go to, Target, Best Buy, whatever, to shop for
Mhm.
something, but it's just a little off. It's got an extra hyphen, or it's got O replaced by a zero. And, in your, I say that, as consumers, the scammers are essentially looking for those key elements of emotional, like something that excites you, something that might scare you, something that might get you anxious and may cause you to click on something. So essentially, those are the vectors, sort of, you can say, on where and how consumers, businesses get impacted.
The people are, behind this, they're making a pretty penny because according to a McAfee Center for Strategic and International Studies, cybercrime is a $1 trillion industry. I did not say that incorrectly. That is a $1 trillion industry. Just that number alone is crazy to me. So, is there other recent data or statistics that organizations should be aware of?
Yeah, I would say 1 trillion and growing, right?
Right.
It's constantly evolving. We've seen about 44% small businesses, for example, have experienced some sort of a cyber attack, and 70% of them have had repeated attacks. And when these attacks happen, then these businesses or even individuals end up losing money. It could either be because of recovery costs or because they have to pay something up, um, you know. But essentially, small businesses, we've seen about 61% of those impacted businesses had to pay at least about $10,000 just to deal with these attacks, right? And if you think in terms of time and money, I mean, that's a lot. You're talking about valuable time being lost, and the stress of having to recover and get things established, and then that constant worry that your data may have been compromised. So it's probably a lot more than we anticipate. Sometimes you can't put a money, or you can't put a number on the amount of loss that people are experiencing as a result of these cyber attacks.
Right, yeah, it goes beyond the, monetary value, but at the same time, you also don't wanna be that employee that clicks on the wrong email and then costs the company, those thousands and thousands of dollars. So I liked what you said about 1 trillion and growing, because it's just like you said, as more advancements are coming, so are, more money's being made through this, this type of cybersecurity threat. So you talked about a lot of the vulnerabilities and the impacts and the types of cybersecurity threats. So what are some of the other consequences? Because we talked about the monetary value, but there are other consequences, excuse me, such as regulatory fines and trust with those clients and the partners. So can you name a couple more that you think of?
Yeah, essentially, if you fall victim to to cybercrime, essentially you got compromised, your data got breached. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it. Of course, you have the recovery cost, so there's disruption in operation time, so there's downtime, and any monetary loss associated with that, is one thing. But then there are some side effects. So you could get sued because if you are managing, PII or HIPAA information, for instance, right? Like there could be organizations that get sued because they got breached. So there's a lot of side effects of actually getting breached. And then finally, there is that customer trust which has been impacted, right? So being able to regain that trust, like how do you get customers to trust you after such a breach, is equally important. And it's one of those things where organizations have to do a lot as a result of the incident, just in recovery of time, money, trust, all of that.
What many people, who are not maybe fully involved or really involved at all might think that cybersecurity is just an IT issue, but it's really not. It goes, like you said, well beyond it. And it's an organizational issue where everyone has a responsibility to play a role. So regarding everyone playing a role, what does that look like within an organization to you?
So 100%. Yes, it goes beyond just an organization. So one of the challenges here is just the threat landscape and how rapidly it's evolving. The tools that were very difficult to obtain in the past, are much more easier to obtain now. The bar has been lowered, so to say, with AI. And the proliferation of these threats is just much more broader. And so, with all this information around cyber threats and evolution of AI, I think the first step that anybody can do is develop the right habits. Cyber hygiene is like a good habit, right? You need to develop it over time. You have to constantly practice. You have to be aware of what's going on around you. And that education can take you a long way. So, security awareness training is definitely one thing. Everybody should be doing it, whether it's coming from your organization or not, doesn't matter. You should be more aware, for your family, for whatever, for your own personal reasons, like read up, know your enemy. I think, it's important to understand who you're dealing against and learn from others' experiences, right? That's an important part of what we all should do. Having the right tools is equally important. I'd like to give an analogy of just ourselves, right? Like when it gets cold, you wear a jacket, right? You protect yourself. The goal is not to fall, right? You have the right tools, whether it's multi-factor authentication or it's ensuring that you're patched, or it's utilizing the right tools like deepfake detection, scam detection, malware protection, VPN. So these are tools that can sort of help you navigate this complicated landscape. Organizations, I would say, also need to set policy. So because things are moving very rapidly, access to ChatGPT is easy. What sort of information are you allowed or you not allowed to put up there? What sort of information should you be posting on media? What sort of open source software should you be adopting as a part of your own solutions? So data governance, classification are extremely important. And then finally, I would say that crisis response. So in the event that something goes wrong, if you do fall sick, who do you go to? Do you call 911? How critical is it? Do you go to the doctor, set up an appointment? Like, how are you going to navigate that scenario where you do fall ill, right? It's a combination of education, of course, it's tools and all of this, but I think security starts with the mindset. So you want to be a little skeptical and you want to be a little paranoid. Just like your body, like when you put in a critical condition, your body sort of gathers those defenses to protect you, right, from the inside. It's your immune system that gets activated when you get scared or you're dealing with a response scenario. So, in a very similar manner, right, you have to be sort of prepared and be a little paranoid because then automatically you are raising the level of security against yourself and your organization.
I've definitely have come close to, falling victim to it, outside of work, and I've had a friend check and they go, "Oh, no, this is a real thing, like, somebody was supposed to send this to you, and, you got it sourced through." So it's definitely, like you said, that cybersecurity hygiene. I love the analogies you brought forth, because it's just everyday practice, making sure that, you're just double checking your steps. So I really, really love that. And so can you provide, some examples, because we understand, some people might not be fully engaged, maybe because they might not fully understand, even if their company, tries to make them aware. So, how can organizations really educate and engage employees, to adopt better cybersecurity practices?
I think there's probably different ways you can do this.
Mhm.
One of them is, of course, education, right? So education is a key part of it. Setting policy is important. What should the do's and don'ts be for people? Like constantly keep reminding them. So clear communication about these, mandatory trainings. And sometimes this can get a little boring, right? Constantly having to do these trainings is, come on, nobody likes to do that. But I think
True.
if you can make it a little interesting, like gamify it, make it
Mhm.
interesting, like, hey, make it a challenge, they provide some sort of um, a goal, but also a reward. If somebody gets it really right, like make it a competition sometimes, right? And have simulated attacks if required, where you can send those phishing emails, which are, obviously not true, but just helping you sort of build that eye to identify what looks and feels suspicious, right? So I think by making it a little more um, informative, fun, educational, but also understanding the risks. The thing is that because most scams start with social engineering attacks, it's not that complicated hack that happen. Sometimes it's as easy as somebody duping you over a phone call or a text message, right? And so I think the simplest form is to try to apply as much common sense when you get that unknown text, or if somebody is trying to invoke a sense of anxiety or frustration, take some time to think about it, to analyze it. I think at the most, you don't have to make it really complicated. Sometimes simplicity is the best form of security.
So I have a question for you regarding, cross-departmental collaboration. How can HR and business leaders really help stimulate that collaboration, not just, across any department, but really like IT teams, leadership, and employees to remain agile on the defenses?
Yeah, I think collaboration is key. In this world where you're working globally across different geos, coordination, communication is absolutely necessary. And so I think it's important to get the message out there. And I'm not just talking about communication within your organization, it's also cross organization communication, right? Like typically, especially for businesses, uh, if you get targeted, it's targeting a certain sector, right? And so there's a lot of cross team and cross organizational sharing of threat intelligence and IOCs, which is indicators of compromise, just so that you can get ahead of it. Like you learn from other experiences, you share information, and you get ahead. And one way to do that is, to be plugged in. If you see something, say something, right? Even if you don't expect this to be like, if there's a little hint, sometimes a gut is really helpful. Like if you believe that there's something wrong here, talk to your security operations center. Like if you're a part of a business, of course, you probably have some security person, some incident response person, get their opinion and try to see if they can help give you some guidance, because you may not be the security expert in your company, but you can definitely help by providing them that information um, and probably saving the entire company. And there are many examples of this. Like, I'll give you one example that I had last year where I got a text message from my CEO. That's not common. And, it turned out to be one of those scams where they want you to buy an Apple gift receipt because they're extremely busy in a presentation and they want you to go and, buy an Apple gift card. Right. And so it comes directly from your CEO. So, HR should be very deliberate about educating the customers that, hey, in no scenario will your CEO ever send you a message asking for a payment with Apple gift cards, or probably, never would you expect that to happen. And even if you do get such an expected, invoice, let's say you get an invoice, right, from a vendor, follow the policy, follow the procedures, right? Don't go. There was a recent hack last year where on a live deep fake or Zoom call, they faked the images and the audio of people within an organization. And this came out of Hong Kong. And they lost, I think, about $25 million because it was too believable to be true. And the person who made the payment obviously, was overwhelmed when he saw his CEO and the key people in his organization forcing him to make the payment. Like, take a step back and think about the policies that need to go into place. And as an organization, you need to set those barriers, right?
Mhm.
You don't just let a cryptocurrency payment go out, or there has to be roadblocks along those important payments and across those important security practices to ensure that you are giving enough of defense in depth, right? You're looking at each action as it goes through. And the only way to do that is to set the right policies, decimate that information very effectively, and help your organization sort of solve this problem holistically as a whole. It's not one individual, it's going to be everybody contributing a little bit, which is going to get you there. And a large part of that is how you share information and intelligence.
Right. Everybody be a hero and, be skeptical. Don't be afraid. Just, be definitely think twice before you click on anything or accept anything. So I would love to give our audience a scenario here. So let's jump into that a little bit. Let's say there's a major data breach that just occurred. What are the first steps organizations should take when when they detect such a security breach?
The first step is try to identify the source of the breach. If it's a system, isolate the system. In I used to tell my own cybersecurity researchers, because we deal with malware all the time. If you ever run into a situation where you think you have run something that you shouldn't have, disconnect from Wi-Fi. Disconnect that wired connection, because the last thing you want it is to move laterally. Which is move across the organization. So identify, isolate, and then contact the right people, engage the right folks. Incident response, your security operations center, which is called the SOC. If your organization has an MDR team, which is doing managed detection and response, engage them, right? And if you're a consumer, you might want to report that. Right? If you feel that you were duped of your money, if you were, if somebody was able to use your credit card, like get in touch with your credit card company, right?
Right.
Or if you are in a business that has lost social security numbers or HIPAA, then you need to you need to inform the right organization, the FTC or the FBI, just so that they can help you take action, because those
Right.
are very serious sort of breaches. So I think a part of it is having the right incident response plan and giving people the right information, the right phone numbers to call, the right people to contact, even if they doubt, even if they're not sure, but just want to double validate, they should be able to get to the right people. In the case that you do get breached, have the right people that you need to contact, whether it's law enforcement, depending on the criticality of the issue, you have a list of people that you will respond and notify.
Planning and preparing, big step in preventing, such problems from happening or preventing them from getting worse if they do occur. So that's good to know. Thank you. So Abhishek, we're gonna leave you off with this question. Do you foresee any emerging cybersecurity threats, and how can organizations prepare to address them collectively? Is there anything you foresee becoming an issue or starting to become an issue already?
Pretty much the threats have remained the same, but what has happened is the lower bar to entry. So what we're seeing is that somebody who was a very novice programmer, right, has the tools to create malware. So what we're seeing is a flurry of malware. Could be anything. It could be malware itself or scams, right? So we're seeing that increase at a very rapid pace at the moment. And you're all like, if you, even as a consumer, if you go on your social media platform today, like you see a bunch of deep fakes, whether it's for entertainment or for other reasons. I mean, there's just so many available out there. It just sort of tells you how these tools will then be utilized by attackers for the wrong reasons, right? So AI has played a huge part in it. What sort of attacks do we see or we expect to see? Well, at least for organizations, you need to be cautious about, what kind of keys that you use to access your online resources. If you're using like a foundational model provided by AWS or, by Google, then have you secured your keys, right? That's important because anybody getting access to those keys could sort of piggyback on your infrastructure to cause harm, right? So that's one thing you want to look at. If you are, it's very commonplace now that most companies will either have their own models or will be utilizing the AI of some other companies. So, being aware of where your data is available, intellectual property, you don't want it to be utilized by somebody else or by an adversary. So what you post online is very important. You might want to have some red teamers look at external visibility of your organization just to assess what information is out there, because that will be abused and used against you in some cases. So, and in the most extreme cases, we're talking about things like adversarial attacks on your AI models, right? So anything which is trying to get your model to do or behave differently than it's intended, right? Or even model theft, right? So that could be a few things. And another one we've seen in the last few years is supply chain attacks. Like, it's just everybody is, more open about sharing code, and that openness is great till the time the attackers try to seed the malware within your source code, right? If you are up on GitHub and it's used for sharing code, for example, it's common to find the bad guys or the adversaries sort of placing their malware there, which is then consumed by many people, right? So just recently, we spoke about a malware family called Luma Stealer, which is actually deploying in GitHub or some of these places, which are very accessible to most small businesses. And when they go and download that, thinking that they're downloading software for their purposes, might actually get infected. There's a lot of basic attacks which I think have just been accelerated. The volume of those have gone up, and the ability to make them faster and deploy them faster is what is a bigger threat for all of us today.
So it's vital now more than ever to be prepared. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of All Things Work. Thank you, Abhishek, for sharing your experiences and guiding us through this very, technical time in the advances of AI with cybersecurity threats.
Nice. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
We appreciate your insight. All right, we have new content each week with a newsletter and the latest research on these major topics. Just head to shrm.org/allthingswork and comment, follow us on social media. We want to hear from you. That'll be it for this week. We'll catch you next time.
SHRM.